Good evening, my name is Marie Fowler. I'm the Green Spaces Development Officer for Randacon and Taff, and this evening I'm going to do a presentation on wildflowers and their management. So the topics I'm going to cover are basically a definition of what wildflowers are, what they mean in relation to our pollinators, a little bit of information about give a little love to your weeds, love them and don't mow them, how to manage a wildflower meadow successfully, what you might get to see if you do, what sort of grass cycle is needed in order to encourage wildflowers within a garden, for instance, what's currently going on in RCT, a little bit of information about bee bombs, as well as the issue of garden waste and guerrilla planting, and finally we'll leave you with some nice examples of some typical wildflowers you might see in RCT. So what are wildflowers? They are essentially flowers which are native to your local area. They are vital for our local wildlife. They obviously are typical of our soils and our climate, so they're very strong and quite adapted to our conditions. They are free and they're already in the soil, and all they want really is a chance to sort of put on show, a chance to shine. Wildflowers are a really important food source for pollinators, both in terms of nectar and pollen, but they're also an important food source for other animals as well, such as birds and bats and other mammals. In terms of the wildflowers themselves, they provide a good quality pollen and nectar, which is specifically tailored for the type of fauna we have here, such as our local bees, bumblebees, butterflies, and so forth. And all we need really is to show them a little bit more respect and show them a little bit more love. It's interesting to note that about 75% of our food is pollinated by animals or insects across the world. Pollinators obviously we don't just mean bees or bumblebees, there are also moths, bats, birds in some countries of the world, beetles. So quite a vast array of animals actually have the pollination process. But essentially the most important message here is that pollinators need wildflowers to survive, so we need to look after them. The two examples that I have illustrated here of daisies and dandelions, if you're a keen gardener, they're probably some of your most hated plants. Because they serve seeds so readily and they come up all the time. But the bottom line is it's quite important to remember that these flowers are native wildflowers. They're a very important food source for our insects. Dandelions in particular are quite critical. They're one of the first wildflowers to actually emerge and flower. And they're very important because they provided a central food source for emerging queen bees and bumblebees. So early in the season, around April time, once they start to sort of come up, if you can leave them sort of be and don't mow them straight away, because they are really important. They play important parts within the whole of the food chain process. So essentially, love them, don't mow them. Wildflowers are very pretty. They're native. They don't ask for much. All they want really is the opportunity to actually come up, flower, and go to seed. They might appear anywhere, they might appear like you want them in places, but they are in places where you really don't want them. But ultimately, they are really important for our local pollinators. So it's really important that we make sure that we look after them. And they do it so well. You know, I don't think as a horticulturist or as a trained horticulturist, you know, you would never manage to have this kind of combinations of both colors and textures if you try to do it artificially. If you let it come, you know, I think it's worth the gamble. You might come up with something really, really special. Managing for wildflowers is actually one of the easiest forms of gardening you can possibly imagine. The easiest form because all you have to do is to let the grass grow and essentially not use any chemicals, just let the flowers come up, flower, go to seeds. And once they've completed their life cycle, then you can then start mowing them towards the end of August, beginning of September. And the more important, really fundamentally important step is to make sure that you collect the clippings, because the clippings will then collecting the clippings will impoverish the soil conditions, which means that you will have over time more wildflowers and the grass will be less vigorous. So it's really simple. And over time you might get to see things like these, beautiful orchids, for instance, or you might get to have a good shot at seeing some of these very interesting insects, a blue butterfly or a hawk moth. So the grass cycle for wildflowers is very simple. Just to sum up, let the grass come, delay the cutting of your grass until late summer, early autumn. Cut the grass and most essentially make sure you collect the clippings, which will then in turn impoverish the soil. You'll have percentage of grass will become less. You'll have more wildflowers coming up, which essentially will mean more food for insects, pollinators, and obviously more food for us. So what's currently going on in RCT? About 130 hectares of land is currently dedicated for wildflower management. That's the equivalent of about 136 Millennium Stadium pitches. And it covers a whole array of habitats, from grass verges through to areas within parks, via cemeteries, via some areas left within our countryside sites, and all being managed for the haircut sort of system. Or we also have areas which have been donated to us through the planning process, where we're actually using conservation grazing. There are some sites that may be already local to you. Some sites, for instance, have listed 3 there: Church Village Bypass, Blind Rhondda Park, Peace Park. They're all very quite well-known areas, I think. And they all undergo the cut and collect or the hay meadow method of management. The butterfly on the bottom left corner of your screen is essentially the symbol that hopefully you'll get to see more and more across the county borough. It's going to demarcate those areas which we are setting aside for wildflower management. And in parallel to this, we're also running a hashtag Follow the Butterfly campaign, so that you can follow us on Twitter and on Facebook, just to illustrate some of the work that we're doing. And I think it's a nice opportunity if you're driving along with children, for instance, back of the car, they can go and try to spot the butterfly, for instance. Another initiative we're hoping to launch towards the end of the summer is the Grab Your Rake campaign. Essentially, it's where those sites, some of the sites that RCT has, is trying to manage for wildflowers, can have, for instance, difficult topography. It could be quite a steep sort of bank, or it could just simply be that they have a complex habitat. Blind Rhondda Park, for instance, has an area within it which has ancient ant hills. And obviously, if we were to put a mower through it, we would actually plow through all the ant hills and kill everything. So the concept is that we actually carried that out last year with staff. The concept is to have members of staff to stream the areas and then ask members of the committee to come and join us and to rake these areas and bag the clippings or take the bit clippings somewhere where we can make habitat piles. And over time then we will manage to, again, reduce the percentage of grass or make the grass less vigorous, so we can have more wildflowers to support our native pollinators. I needed to put this in the presentation, I felt, because we do get quite a lot of inquiries about the bee bombs. There's been a lot of promotion on Channel 4, for instance, for the use of these bee bombs in some parts of England. And whilst it's quite acceptable for some parts of the country, in Wales it's a different story. A lot of these flower seeds that are being used are not necessarily native to the area. And if they're not necessarily native, they may not be necessarily native to Wales, let alone native to RCT. So what you could potentially be doing by using bee bombs is encouraging species which are not native to the area, which will then compete with our own native wildflowers, which are already struggling. So the idea is that we stop people from actually doing that, whether it's through bee bombs or through these wildflower mixes you can buy anywhere. The important thing as well is that some of these wildflower species might become invasive over time. I mean, I'm using the example there of Himalayan balsam. Please note I am not suggesting that Himalayan balsam is a seed that is contained within these bee bombs. That's not the point that I'm making there. It's more to make people think about how innocent some seeds might seem and how quickly they can turn into becoming quite invasive for our natural environment. I do agree that yes, some of these mixes are very pretty, but they are not really suitable for our local pollinators. The quality of the pollen and nectar is not quite adapted for them. And the general message, yes, I guess, is try to say, please don't use them. If you have an area of grass and you live within the county borough, the likelihood is that you will probably have something within the ground that is just waiting to come up. It's just going to be given the chance by being managed differently. Another important aspect of seeing a lot of local authorities, I know across the country are doing this, they actually have to use chemicals to get rid of an area of grass and all the wildflowers that may be there in order to sow these seeds thereafter. So you're essentially using really non-environmentally friendly methods to encourage a species which is also not necessarily an environmentally friendly sort of species, just in order to sort of please people, because people are getting this misconception that poppies and cornflowers should be everywhere across the country, and that's not the case. The key message here from our point of view is that RCT is so biodiversity rich already. We're very lucky that we have a floristically rich seed bank that is just waiting to come through. It's just requiring a change in management. The example I've got on the left-hand side of the screen here, for instance, is an area of bank which has been left, was left last year, is left again this year in Aberdare. And as you can see, none of these were actually sown. These are obviously daisies. There's the oxide daisies, and there's also an orchid growing in there, which we wouldn't have known about it if that grass hadn't been left to sort of do its thing. Another issue that we are facing as an authority is how people deal with garden waste and how they want to do some guerrilla planting everywhere. The garden waste is a big issue for us because we're finding a lot of people, quite innocently a lot of the time, assume that because I don't know, they may have clipped the hedge and they're thinking, oh, I can't really be bothered to actually bag it all for the council. So what they do is they actually take the clippings and toss it over the fence or dump it somewhere in their nearby countryside to save them the hassle. The result of that is, unfortunately, that a lot of these species then manage to somehow regrow from the cuttings. I have given a few examples here with the laurel, the cotoneaster, the bellias, all plant species that really would readily take over, and they are taking over, unfortunately, our sort of native environment. Cotoneaster is a big problem with us, laurel even bigger. The box honeysuckle, Lonicera pliata or Lonicera nitida, very, very, very difficult to sort of get rid of once they're on site. So it takes additional management then for us to try to get rid of it. Flowers are also another issue. I mean, Montbrechia, I think most people will know. Crocosmias, most people will know about them. If they're already invasive in your garden, the chances are they've been invasive somewhere else. But people have this concept that if there is an area of bramble just down the road from them, that it's okay to go and cut all the brambles back and actually start planting bulbs or putting flowers in there. And the reality of it is that it's not a good idea. It's really not good for the environment. Spanish bluebells is an example that we want to sort of give to people because it needs to raise awareness that we are gradually losing our native bluebells because they are being cross-pollinated with the Spanish bluebells. So we are gradually having hybrids, a new form of bluebell being developed through our native woodlands. So over time, unfortunately, we are very much at risk of losing our native bluebells. So it's really important, if you do have Spanish bluebells in your garden, please don't dig them up and then put them in the wild, because they're not the same type as the ones that are currently growing in our native woodlands, for instance. Three-cornered garlic, again, is another one that people, which is quite, again, invasive in the garden, that people just think, oh, just put it there, and then it very quickly takes over and becomes a problem. So the overall message here again is, if they're non-native plants, they're obviously going to start competing with our own native plants. They will take over, they can cast shade, they'll take nutrients out of the soil, which will compromise then our own native species. So the message, please deal with your garden waste responsibly, put it out for recycling, or burn it, or whichever form you can do it. Because if you don't, we are really at risk of losing our native species and having all these ornamental species coming in instead, which is not good news for anything, for pollinators or animals. It's really important people understand that with the bluebells, for instance, there are specific types of insects that might be feeding on them, and doesn't necessarily equate that the quality of the pollen from a Spanish bluebell would be the same. Or, if some of these native species that we have of plants start to struggle and become extinct, then potentially this could have a knock-on effect on the fauna that we have in RCT. So please be responsible for it. I thought I'd leave you now with some nice photographs of some of the flowers you might be able to see in RCT. The green-winged orchids, for instance, you can find this one primarily south of the county borough. We have a couple of sites where we know it's growing. One of them is Kemner Park Cemetery, if you wanted to go and have a look at it. The bee orchid, again, primarily south of the county borough. I think, although there have been some sightings up in the Rhondda as well. And the southern marsh orchid, which is probably a little bit more widespread across the county borough. Orchids are very special plants. If you are a gardener, you'll probably be familiar with the concept of, well, collect the seeds, sow them, and then I'll have more flowers coming. With orchids, it's not the case. Orchids are very, very special in the way that they grow. They are what we call semi-parasitic plants. So essentially the seeds from these flowers need to be, for them to germinate, they will need to have very specific conditions to grow. They need to attach themselves to a fungus, a specific fungus within the soil, which will then make the seeds germinate. And as it germinates, it comes up and it produces another flower. If the fungus is not present within the soil, then that seed could be sitting in the ground for hundreds of years before actually coming up and flowering. So I think they deserve a lot of respect. Some of these plants could have been sitting there for a very long time before they got a chance to germinate. So if you do come across them, please do not pick the flowers. Please do not pick the seeds out of it. Leave them be, just enjoy them for what they are. Look at them, take photographs of them, and by all means tell us where you've seen them. Other examples of some more common perhaps wildflowers. Cuckoo flower, quite present in quite a lot of our verges, especially springtime. Birdsfoot trefoil tends to be seen on the edges of roundabouts or grass verges. Again, more of a summery sort of plant coming up. And black knapweed, very important for pollinators. Once again, this is one that actually comes up sort of midsummer and flowers well into the autumn. Very important food source for bees in particular because of the way the flower is sort of set up. And that's it for me. If you have any questions, then I'd be quite happy to answer them. Thank you.